Good evening. The Monday, February 9, 2026 City Council work session is called to order. The first item on the agenda tonight is public comment on agenda items. If there's anybody here from the public that would like to speak to an item on the agenda, now's your chance. Seeing no one, we'll move on to the next item, which is the Senior Center Master Plan presentation. John.
Sean has, I believe, a representative from Fishbeck here to provide a presentation on a master plan presentation for the Senior Center.
Thank you, John. Connor's got the magic. Sorry about that. Thank you. Glad to be here tonight. So the Senior Center, I'm not sure if you all know, we've had a long-standing visioning master plan document. It's about 20 years old at this point. So as we've kind of taken a step back and looked at different capital needs in that building, we wanted to instead of going piecemeal one by one and fixing tiny thing by tiny thing, after 20 years, it felt very important to take a step back and get input from the public. So talk to our current seniors, talk to those who will be seniors, whether or not they want to be identified that way, but it's always important to think about the future of that space. And so we engaged with Fishbeck to help us go along in that process, and tonight they're going to share some of their findings. We spent a lot of time with community, we spent a lot of time with our current seniors, we spent some time with folks who didn't even know what the Senior Center was, so it's always important to start getting those voices and hearing about the future for our seniors and what that's going to look like. So this is just initial findings based on what we heard from the public, and lots of great things in store. So I'll introduce you to Steve from Fishbeck, who will do the presentation for us.
Good evening. I'm Steve Romkin with Fishbeck. Been working with Prashant and the rest of the team at the Senior Center here for the last 3 months or so, 4 months. It's February now, so 5 months almost. Something in that range. Holidays slowed things down. So we got some initial findings. What we ultimately did, just to give you a quick overview, is we really had a high-level assessment of what's going on in the building, what the community is looking for moving forward. So community engagement being a key piece of this. We conducted several different forms of it. We did a couple of in-session groups with the Fellowship Club as well as the Parks and Rec Commission. We attended Winter Wonderland and had a table set up there and elicited feedback from the community. And we also had a online survey that ran through the holidays from Thanksgiving through the end of the year and a little bit after that as well. That was promoted by the Parks and Rec team as well publicly. And we ended up with over 240 responses, which is pretty good from what we see in West Michigan in terms of engagement with the community through online means. That was offered in both English and Spanish for accessibility as well. So some of the key findings, as a quick recap, intergenerational programming was of huge interest across all segments, regardless of age or using it today or not. 75% would use the center if it had the desired programming that they were interested in. But there's also within the community a pretty good lack of understanding of what the community center is or what the senior center is. It's perceived as a nursing home based on the name. And then the program offerings, there's a lack of awareness of those as well. There was a lot of feedback we got that said, hey, it'd be great if you did X, Y, and Z. Well, they're already doing X, Y, and Z. Just that awareness is not out there in the community right now. So in terms of really what we want, what we were looking at is what did people want to see in the future? And those key pieces are related to things like arts and craft, enhancement to the travel program, which already goes on, physical activity, multi-generational physical activities, intergenerational program, as I mentioned before, increases in life skills, outdoor activities. Aquatics was another big area of feedback too. And we also asked about what improvements people were looking at. So a better lobby space. When you walk in, it feels more open and welcoming. just general improvements to the restrooms, rebranding the facility. This really speaks to it not being a senior center, a housing senior center, but a space for community, as well as enlarging the cafe, fitness, again, larger art room, and an improved kitchen too. Yeah.
Can I ask one quick question? What's the significance between the outline, the pink outline versus not?
Let me come back to that in just 1 minute.
Thank you.
Yep. We also looked at why people use it or don't use it. So a lot of the feedback came down to just social connections and interactions with other people from the community. And then from there, it's really, they enjoy the program that's always going on. And of course, bingo. We can't get away from the senior center and not talk about bingo. Why people don't use it is also another key piece that we dive into. So perception, again, that it's not for their age group, whether that's real or unreal. The term senior carries a certain connotation, but when it's open, a lot of people in their 50s don't necessarily view themselves as being a senior, even though they qualify to use the facility. Again, not aware of program offerings. Cost is another thing. Even though the facility is free, there's a perception that the programming does cost money. And then hours of operation, time conflicts, those types of issues related to use. Again, that skews more towards the younger demographic that could use the facility, who are still working full-time and can't go at 10 a.m. To some programming. So as we get into then, what does this mean for space? Want to pull back and just refresh everybody's mind on what is in the building today. So as you come in, we have that lobby space, but in the yellow is that large multi-purpose room, very flexible, with a series of spaces that surround it. There's spaces for recreation, there's pool tables in there, there's a library, administrative type spaces. There is a small cafe, coffee shop. On the right-hand side here, we do have some fitness areas. One is a large open room for the exercise and dance studio, more group-based physical activities, but there is also a fitness center. And then a couple of art or ceramics spaces as well. And then the last one is a kitchen. So as we look through this, and this is where those highlightings are going to come into play a little bit more, we first started looking at, based on the feedback we got, what are things that would be relatively simple to just go and implement? There were two areas that really rose to the top of general restroom improvements. That's really, can we dress them up, put new finishes into them, just improve the overall look and feel of them? Something that's pretty easy to execute whenever funds may be available. The other one was a rebrand, and we got plenty of feedback on different naming for it, but just changing the title of it being a senior center to really improve the understanding of what programming is offering and how it fits into the community. One of the other pieces is the improved kitchen, and there was an RFP that came out not too long ago from Parks and Rec to start some of those improvements already, so that one's kind of in progress as well. And then we started looking at what are the types of spaces that would be needed to support some of these. So if we start with the multi-purpose room, there's a lot of the feedback related to travel programs. That really, in terms of what is the physical impact on the senior center, is a space for people to gather as they wait for buses or offload. Not a huge burden on the facility in terms of specialized spaces. Same thing related to intergenerational programming, so life skills. So a lot of feedback related to having flexible environments that allow the community to come in and gather in a multitude of ways. So an example in terms of how we might integrate life skills, there's a lot of interest in nutrition programs, cooking classes. So looking at flexibility within those multi-purpose rooms, that you don't have to have a dedicated cooking kitchen, for instance. We can use tables, hot plates, and whatnot to do that same sort of programming within those existing spaces. As we start to look at art, a few things that came up there is more crafts, woodworking, some maker space type environments, if you will, and really increasing the size of it. As we were doing our analysis, the image in the top left is what the ceramics room is today. So we think one of the easier implementations or changes that can be made is to try to create a environment more like the images on the bottom that's flexible. It doesn't have all of the storage for those art programs in the space, and actually leverage the storage that is directly adjacent to it. Here we go. There we go. So directly adjacent to it, and create some connections there so that the storage support spaces, right now there's a couple of kilns in that space, for instance. There's a lot of infrastructure that makes it difficult to use that in multiple ways. So pull that out of that space in the adjacent storage area instead.
I do not recommend high bar stools for the seniors. Probably not a good idea. Keep the tables at a nice level for them. We don't need people falling off them and breaking hips. I mean, it keeps me in business, but still, just saying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We had some feedback related to the lobby as well. So we did start to look at some initial redesigns. One of the big pieces of feedback is you walk in, you feel like you're hitting a wall with where the reception desk is at. There's not a lot of place to really hang out in there. So I think there's an opportunity to kind of redesign that and simplify the circulation from that space. So the plan on the left here is what's there today. The plan on the right is a proposed alternative, and you can see the amount of green space there that's growing based on simplifying that, just to create a little bit more functional space versus so much space dedicated to circulation. And part of that too is looking at how might the administrative offices function long-term. So right now there's the space directly as you walk in, but there's also a large office in the back of the building, and looking at an opportunity to consolidate that so all the staff is right there at the front door. The reception becomes part of that, and we really create a little bit more spatial efficiencies by consolidating those functions together. In terms of food and the cafe, a lot of feedback with the life skills, but can we create a better coffee shop, cafe type of an experience as well as the kitchen? So we did look at a couple of different planning scenarios as to how that may work, whether it is locating it directly adjacent to the kitchen to get food in one specific zone, so we have some synergies there, or leveraging some of the existing spaces on Alternative A, where we can combine two small spaces into one larger space to create that larger environment. And then we really grouped all of the fitness, aquatics, and outdoors together. There's a lot of overlaps to these. These start to have a bigger impact on the site itself. We're really looking beyond the building too. So one of the big things is related to more broader intergenerational programming and more physical activities. When it came to fitness, there was a desire for activities for the younger side of the seniors groups as well. So actually being able to play basketball or pickleball in an environment. And to really respond to those, we felt creating a gym sort of environment would be the key. So we looked at a couple of different ways of doing that. The one on the left is really a simplistic, simpler approach of just creating a dedicated gym environment, high bay, so that you can do more of those physical activities. Obviously, that comes with storage needs as well. And then the right one would be to create more of a fitness center. The idea there is it could be something that is standalone and works independent of the senior center, if you will. So a dedicated entry, for instance, into that so that the community at large could come in, have easy access to it without having to traverse through the entire building to get there. This is where we start to get into some challenges with the site. So in the orange there, this is the existing site. The orange is the rough magnitude of that scale. The red line you see there is the existing property line. So we can get a gym, locker room, this is that larger footprint, onto the site and have it work. One of the things that we ultimately found was that on this aquatic side, our little rectangle there on the left-hand side would be about the magnitude of a small aquatic center. That would be pool, locker room, really nothing beyond that, but it would ultimately be too large for that. So that feedback that we got from the community of having that interest just would not work on this site ultimately. We also got a lot of feedback about outdoor programming. There's a great space outside already that we think can be redeveloped for integrating that. That's outdoor gardens, community garden type environments, as well as outdoor games and whatnot too. So we went through all of that, and we ultimately came out with an overall recommended planning strategy that kind of merges a little bit of everything. Some of the key highlights are those yellow areas are really looked at as being multiple multi-purpose rooms. They may, be a lounge space most of the time, but really building flexibility into there. So as programming changes or the needs happen, instead of relying on a single multi-purpose room that's set up for a large group, you've got some smaller areas to flex into. The consolidation of the admin area as well, so everybody is co-located. Again, trying to optimize the space for that. And then the fitness area would be the other big addition too. So we did look briefly at how this could phase so that it can remain operational. And it's dominoes at the end of the day. So really the first thing that would have to make happen is relocating that cafe into into an existing space, and then the offices could be backfilled into where the cafe is today, and then we could execute that lounge space, which is currently occupied by the library and the office that would be relocating. All of the other changes that we kind of went through real quick could happen independently. They don't have that same domino situation of moving things out of the way to make it work ultimately. So we did, because this was high level, we did have several recommendations. In terms of short-term projects, we think, if there was interest, rebranding the existing building and making sure there's visibility to the existing programs, reviewing the open hours, and of course the operational impacts of that. Longer hours, more staff, there's costs. Refreshing the restrooms would be 3 easy projects that could be broken off pretty much any time. We also have some additional recommendations on studies. The first one being to take these plans, put some cost to them, allow for capital planning to happen that way. The next one is really the biggest one, I think, and that would be to conduct a feasibility study for a combined community center. We had a lot of feedback. We talked with the senior groups about, instead of a dedicated senior center, could it be an extension of a community center? And that was generally positively received, of having one facility that served the community and the senior population. That allows for things like a gymnasium to be used by multiple groups, a aquatic center, if that were to come on board, to be used by multiple groups just based on programming and use throughout a day. And then the last piece would be an in-depth study of existing programming and more detail on what we've done as well. So that's a quick recap of what we've been doing the last several months.
Thank you. Anybody have questions? Alvin?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see how many people are actually using the facility like it is. Maybe you have that answer, Sean, I'm not sure, but I'd like to know how much this is being used versus maybe our parks, make sure we're spending our money wisely, putting it where we should be putting it, or whether we should be putting it here. I just have some questions.
Yeah, so we actually have really good data on usage there. So we see about 48,000 people using the senior center as it currently is a year. So there's 48,000 people for a variety of different purposes, whether that's travel programs, they're hanging out for the day, they're there in the game room, but that's been pretty consistent and it continues to climb. I think we were at about 40,000 before COVID, and I think it's just that social interaction piece that people are looking for, and that they highlighted again here, that they're coming to the center to find community and be with others.
So how many people does that encompass? I know there's 48,000 hits on it. How many people are into that 48,000?
Oh, I could get that for you. I could provide that for you.
And
we have a
then
pretty...
The other question I have is how many of these 48,000 are our residents?
I could get that for you too. It's the majority are residents of Wyoming.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are they all 50 plus? Do they have
Yes.
to be 50 plus? What restricts us to the age? I mean, I know we call it senior center, but is there something other than self-imposed restrictions?
Yeah, it's mostly self-imposed. There are some specific programs that would require them to be 50-plus programs that we work with Area Agency on Aging of West Michigan. They have to be at a certain age level to participate in those, and that's really like transportation programs, anything in that kind of
So
realm.
nothing that really impacts the building use itself, just a specific program?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So does that 48,000 not include the fitness programs that are open to 18 plus? Or,
It does not include those
okay, so if we
programs.
included that, the number's actually,
Yes, it's much higher because we have general recreation programs that take place in the building outside of operational hours. So some of our youth programs, like a taekwondo, fitness adult programs, take place outside of those regular operational hours. So the number is, again, likely higher.
The aquatic center, is that an indoor facility? Or would
That
be-
would be.
Okay.
A part of the purpose of this, I will be very open, is that I am not looking for us to get into the business of aquatics. It was one of the number one things that the community said that they wanted. So if that is what the community said in the feedback that they wanted, that is why Steve saw that through and showed us how that does not work in the current footprint and doesn't work with the space that we have. Aquatics are expensive and not really something that, I mean, it's one of the few villages in Wyoming that failed.
Does that building create any revenue?
It does.
And percentage-wise as to what taxpayers are paying for it versus what it's,
Yeah, it covers its costs, basically.
okay.
Yep.
Rob?
How big of a, in the kind of at the master vision, how much of an expansion for that building would we be looking at for doing that gym and a redo? Any idea what square footage that would be?
Yep.
From what we're showing here is in 12 to 16,000 square feet.
What size gym is that then? Put that on like a
That would be a full-size.
high
basketball
school
court.
size gym?
Yeah, a little bit smaller than a high school because we aren't allowing room for bleachers, those types of things. It would be a
So, like-
basketball court with about 10 feet around the court.
2 pickleball courts maybe?
Yeah, 2 to 3 pickleball courts. It's a pretty tight configuration. Yep.
Anyone else?
And personally, I like the waiting room. There's somebody there that greets you, directs you in the right direction. I love the way it's set up right now. And if that's gone, then people walk in and go, I don't know where where's the ceramics room? And then they have to go find the offices, find somebody to tell them. I love that way the lobby is right now. I was actually just there at 4:30 today dropping off some supplies, so I've been in it quite a bit. I think it works. And are we going to keep woodworking? Because I think that's another ceramics and woodworking are super popular. So, and they all love it, and they plan their doctor's appointments around those classes. So, let me tell you, it's very popular.
Yeah, a part of making the space a little more multifunctional is that they don't always play nicely together. So people love those classes, but the classes don't always love each other.
Well, and you're trying to paint your ceramics and someone bumps the table. Now I just messed it up and now there's a fight going on. So, seniors rolling around on the floor, not a good idea. Because then KIP gets called and our fire department gets called to help them up. So,
They're close.
yeah, they are. Thank goodness they're right across the parking lot. And then the parking lot for ceramics and woodworking would be gone with a fitness center on there. So that parking lot, they like that parking lot to get into for ceramics
Right.
and
They would have
woodworking
to use
because
the front.
it's heavy and a lot of the glassware and the kilnware.
Yeah.
So
Is there enough parking without the
they would
without the
have to park
addition on there? If we had the
towards
addition
this
on there?
department.
There's still enough
Yes.
parking? Okay.
Yeah. I will say from a security perspective, having multiple entrances into the building is very difficult for us as staff. So because you could have someone pop into the ceramics, you would have no idea that person is in the building. It's definitely not recommended to continue to leave it. If we were to make changes, that would be a really great security enhancement to not have multiple entrances in that way.
Well, but fire code and stuff, they want to make sure people can escape and have plenty of
Yeah.
time because they're not that fast. and with walkers and stuff, that, believe me.
So I'm curious, I know this is high-level planning, but if you look at remodeling the lobby, was there any discussion of flipping the lobby to the other side so you could have a shared lobby between the two? So that you weren't creating two separate lobbies?
We did not get
What-
into that level of detail on this.
What's in that corner of the building?
In the top left of this here?
It's a
Can
restroom.
you go to sort of your floor
Yeah.
plan first? Yeah, so the middle section, just above and to the right of admin, next to the conference room, what's that corner of the building?
There's storage in there and then a mechanical room as well.
Oh, it's mechanical.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but in terms of before anything were to be implemented, there would be need to be a more intentional study of how best to do this. We put it on the south side for this study to not interfere with the main parking lot, but even the entry location today is not near the most amount of parking either, right? It's the handicap parking's right out in front of it, but everybody else is parking to either side and have to walk up.
I get all that. I just would hate to see us spend money renovating this lobby and then find out it'd be better moved to the other side, so. Any other questions?
And I also think that the people that utilize the senior center too should really get, number one, sit down and chat with them. I mean, they're there a lot.
They're
Just
captured in
say-
this information.
Yeah, and you know what, they're not gonna use the gym. They probably, I doubt it, they're not gonna be playing basketball and stuff. They might have walker races along the
Pickleball.
hallway.
I think
They're
you're
gonna have
Yeah,
pickleball.
pickleball
very
would be-
surprised. Our seniors there are active. I mean, and they're the ones that want more space to play pickleball. They want more space to do fitness classes. Like, this is based on their input. This is not.
Okay, this isn't the community, this is the folks who
It's
come
both of
here.
them, but we heard, I mean, everyone was pretty lockstep on what they're looking for, and their demands for indoor pickleball are high. And that's the current seniors who are in the building right now.
When we did analysis of the online survey in particular, we did look at it based on age group, demographics, and whatnot, and the feedback was consistent across the board. There were slight, variations as you'd expect, but typically we'll see significant variations when you slice it at various age groups. We did not see that this time.
Anyone else?
Are the seniors in favor of changing the senior center to, because that's like that's their gig, and I'd like to get their feedback on if we get rid of the name senior, that's going to open it up to the whole public, and then they kind of lose their thing.
Yeah, a part of why we very intentionally asked how they would feel about the space being intergenerational, and that's taking all ages and inviting them into the space. And I wasn't sure that they would be open to that, and they were very open to it being open for people of all ages. I think that they don't view themselves as seniors and are not looking to associate with that name. And I don't know whether or not a rebrand leads us to whatever the title will be. They would certainly be a part of that process and figuring that out. But I don't know that their association is as much to the Wyoming Senior and the WSC. If anything, it's likely more to the Fellowship Club, because that's the nonprofit friends group. Like, that is where there's some strong, I'm a member, that's my thing. I don't know if it's as much to the name of the building or the branding and that sort of thing, because the center's gone through rebranding over the years. In the past 20 years, it's been rebranded a couple different times.
I would maybe add to that most communities that are looking at a community center type environment are integrating the senior center functions into it. We've done some where it's a wing this is the dedicated senior area, but because it's integrated into a larger facility, they have access to things like a basketball court, weight rooms, those types of things as an added benefit. And that was the conversation we did have with the fellowship group of, if you have a dedicated space for you, how do you feel about being part of a larger facility? And they were definitely, I'd say the majority were in favor of that.
Thank you.
Even with the name change too. Hello, testing. There we go. I think with the name change too, part of it was, regardless of changing the age group, part of it was just making it so that it doesn't sound like a place where seniors live. It sounds like a place where they hang out, right? So we don't necessarily even have to rebrand it away from the age group necessarily, but it could be just rebranded as more of an activity space and less of a, like, what's the senior center, if I'm understanding.
Yes.
Because I also don't want to like take that away from them, and I know that a lot of them did express that, yeah, intergenerational stuff is cool, but like I agree that like there is a community that exists there, and I don't want to take anything away from anybody.
Yeah.
But I think having like a yes and adding some stuff that's open to everybody in addition to the stuff that's just for seniors could be a nice balance.
Rob?
If we did include all generations, I'm with you, Marissa, as far as just making sure that, hey, if I'm a senior, that if I sign up for ceramics or woodworking, that all of a sudden now I get bumped out of a class.
Right.
Making sure they have first rights and first, sign up eligibility for that, so they don't get, cast aside on that process.
Right.
So that'd be my main concern.
Yeah, some of that we would accomplish through looking at the operating hours. So typically, we would look at where our current seniors are already participating. If that's during the day, then we would likely know then a current senior would take a class during that same time. So then if we were able to offer ceramics every night in the evening, we would know that that likely would be a more younger crowd than our current seniors. But we would definitely keep that in mind as we go through this.
This is kind of as unrelated a little bit, but with the aquatic, obviously, like I know we've been down this road before my time that a pool is just not in the cards financially, but have we ever explored a partnership with like the YMCA or anything like that?
Yeah, we currently have a partnership with the YMCA. So because it's important to have swim skills that people safely know how to be in the water, we currently partner with the Y right now to offer swim lessons through them. So if you go to our program guide right now, it points you to classes at the YMCA.
Isn't that for kids though? Because I remember we had
It's
talked
for
about...
all ages.
Oh, really? I didn't
Yeah.
realize that. Oh, cool.
Sign up.
Anyone else? Is this an item, John, that we're looking to adopt, or Parks Commission would adopt, or you're just giving us the information?
No, we just wanted to provide the information. It's guiding us in some next steps. It also is helping us. We want to be able to, we're taking this information also to the seniors. We want to get this in front of the Fellowship Club. The Fellowship Club is very supportive of improvements around the building. So a part of doing this was being able to provide this for them. So if there are some small wins that they may want to invest into the property to make those improvements, I think that they are going to be excited to take a look at some of this. But it was just to give you the information since it's been out there in the community.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is tax increment finance. Presentation, John.
So we had brought this before council a few months ago and actually had considered a couple tax increment financing projects, I think in December. And since that time, some of you had asked if we could revisit this topic and learn a little bit more about it. So we'll try to do a condensed version of that and maybe go into some detail, especially on how the finances of tax increment finance work. Because it can be a little tricky at times. So we'll go through that. So we'll go through what tax increment financing is, what it can be used for. We'll show kind of an example project and also look at what our Brownfield Redevelopment Authority policy is on TIF, and then try to answer the council's questions. So again, as we look at this, there's a baseline, what's called a baseline property tax value is set for every property. And so this is sort of the tax revenue that's generated before a development occurs. And that's represented in dark blue, and I'll go into some more detail about this in a second. And then when the property's redeveloped, it increases in value over time. And you see that increase in tax revenue in the light blue. And that's the part that's reimbursed to the developer for some of the expenses the developer incurs on the project. And then when that developer is totally repaid for some of those expenses, all of that new tax revenue, including the tax revenue that was generated before the project, goes back to the taxing jurisdictions, and that's in red. So before you have, and I'm not going to go through all of this, I'll just go through a couple points of this. There's a spreadsheet in front of you, and I'm going to use this is a fictitious project. So if you ask me what is this based on, it's not based on any city project. But this project assumes we're going to reimburse a developer for $100,000 in cost. So when we've had developments, traditionally it's been on brownfield properties where we might reimburse the developer for contamination or cleanup of contamination, or for public utility costs like putting in some water and sewer mains, for example. And we reach an agreement with the developer to say, we'll reimburse you for these specific costs. And so in this example, we're going to reimburse the developer $100,000 in costs. So maybe it's for environmental cleanup, maybe it's for public utilities. And with any tax increment financing, the developer is still paying their normal tax bill, okay? So as they develop the property and the tax revenue goes up, they're paying that tax bill. But then after they pay the tax bill, some of those taxes are captured by our Brownfield Authority and sent back to the developer to reimburse the developer for some of those costs that we agreed to reimburse them for. So let's take a look at this first part where it says TIF 100% tax capture. And in this example, year one, the pre-development tax revenues are $1,000. So before this project starts, this piece of property is generating $1,000 a year in tax revenue. And then the project gets developed, and now because of the development, it's now generating $10,000 a year in taxes. So that's the row right below, the post-development tax revenues. So the new tax revenues are that difference, $9,000. So once this development occurred, it's now generating $9,000 in new taxes than it was before. And if we're capturing 100% of those taxes, we're going to capture all $9,000 of that. So where it says captured new tax revenues, paid to developer, $9,000. So we're going to, all the new tax revenue that's generated, the Brownfield Authority is going to quote unquote capture that and pay that back to the developer. And so if you look down below where it says the balance of developers' eligible costs, remember we agreed to reimburse the developer $100,000. Well, that first year we generated $9,000 in new taxes. And so now after we pay the developer, the balance we owe is now $91,000. Are you with me so far? Take that as a yes.
Explain the $100,000 again.
Okay, so the $100,000, we agreed on this particular development, hey, developer, we will reimburse you for $100,000 of your cost to redevelop this property.
So the city is giving the developer $100,000?
So the city is going to take the new tax revenue generated from this site and use that to reimburse the developer for those costs. So Sheldon, just on, and I'll go through this year one. So, before the property was developed, it was generating $1,000 in taxes.
So 10 years at $10,000.
So, in year one, and we'll just go down year one. So before the development, the property was generating $1,000 in taxes, okay, in tax revenue. Now, after the development, whatever this development is, it increases the taxable value of the property because it's new construction, new development. And let's say the property is now generating $10,000 a year in tax revenue. Are you with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. So the difference there is $9,000 in new tax revenue. So we have $1,000 of old tax revenue, if you will, and $9,000 in new. Now, under this example, we're capturing 100% of the new tax revenue. So the Brownfield Authority is capturing all $9,000 of that new tax revenue and sending that back to the developer. Okay? So now the developer, instead of owing $100,000, the balance has gone down to $91,000. Does that make sense?
So if
So-
I,
So the $100,000 is just as the start of the project is we reached an agreement with the developer to say, hey, developer, we've agreed to reimburse you for $100,000 of your development costs. So maybe they had to do environmental cleanup. Maybe they're putting in some public infrastructure that we're willing to reimburse them for. So think of a brownfield site that's got contamination on it, and let's just say it's going to cost the developer $100,000 to clean up that contamination. Because we want to get this property developed, we're saying, hey, developer, we'll reimburse you for that cleanup cost of $100,000 in order for you to redevelop this site.
And they're responsible for the 100,000 at the beginning, right? We
Yeah,
don't
they
loan
pay.
them money, they
No,
pay
the
it.
developer pays the cleanup up front out of their own pocket. And so then we reimburse the developer with the new tax revenue that's generated from this new development. So, does that make sense or no?
No, so we pay them and they pay us back.
So the developer, yeah, so
Pretty much.
the developer is paying that cleanup cost, let's just call it $100,000 to clean up this contaminated site. And we've agreed to reimburse that developer that cost. And now it may take us several years to do it, but we've agreed to reimburse the developer so that the developer, we're kind of trying to level the playing field between a contaminated site and a clean site. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how we go down
So,
where this adds up.
so, and in this example, it cost $100,000. The developer has paid $100,000 to have this property cleaned up. So the property's cleaned up, the developer has paid it.
Okay,
And in this first year, we've generated $9,000 in new tax revenue. Okay, because it was before the development, it was generating $1,000 in tax revenue. Now that the developer has redeveloped this property, it's now generating $10,000 in tax revenue. So it's generating $9,000 more dollars in new tax revenue. And in this example, we're going to capture 100% of that new tax revenue in that year, which is $9,000, and we're going to send that $9,000 to the developer. And the developer is going to say, thank you very much. Now you only owe me $91,000. So the taxing jurisdictions are still getting $1,000, that old tax revenue, but we're sending all of the new tax revenue to the developer.
back.
So in year two, we're still, let's just say that because taxable values go up, the taxes generated are $10,500 now this year. Well, that's still $9,500 in new tax revenue compared to the pre-development tax revenue of $1,000. So now it's capturing $9,500 in year two, and we're sending that back to the developer. So the balance, remember it went down to $91,000. Now it's going to go down to $81,500.
Gotcha.
And we're still keeping $1,000. Okay, so we're still getting a little bit. So that's how that goes for all those years. And then if you look at year 9, we're still collecting, that $1,000 in pre-existing tax revenue. It's now generating, in this example, $14,000 in new tax revenue. So, or $14,000 in tax revenue, so that's a $13,000 in new tax revenue. The Brownfield Authority is going to capture that $13,000 revenue, and that brings the balance down from $14,000 to $1,000. And then in the final year, in year 10, we're generating $13,500 in new tax revenue. We only have to pay the developer back $1,000 because that's all he's owed, and we keep the rest. And then from that point on, we're keeping all of that new tax revenue. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. that was-
So that's the 100% tax capture. If you look at the second level, sometimes we've done tax captures at 70%. So and I'll go through just a couple years of this. And obviously, if we're only capturing 70%, it's going to take more time to repay the developer. Okay, and I'll show you why. So in the 70% tax capture year one, same scenario, okay? $100,000, we're reimbursing the developer for cleanup costs. It used to generate $1,000 in tax revenue. It now is generating $10,000 in tax revenue. So the difference is new tax revenue is still $9,000. But in this scenario, we're only reimbursing the developer 70% of that new tax revenue. So we're only sending the developer, in this case, $6,300. And the other 30% comes back to the taxing jurisdictions. So where you look at balancer of developers eligible costs, we're going to go from 100,000 down to 93,700 because we're only reimbursing developer 6,300. And as a taxing jurisdiction, we're keeping that 30%, the 2,700, as well as the $1,000 that was there before the development took place. So that's the taxes revenues retained by the taxing jurisdiction, 3,700. Does that make
That's
sense?
making more sense, yeah.
So, and that goes through all of those years, and then it's finally paid off in the 14th year. So it takes more years to pay back the developer because we're not sending the developer 100% of the new tax revenue. We're only sending the developer 70% of the new tax revenue. But we get to keep more of it initially as well. Now, in these examples, the total revenue that's collected at the end is a heck of a lot more than the $1,000 that we started with. So the theory here is we're giving up temporarily some of that new tax revenue in order to get a property developed such that it's now earning a lot more tax revenue at the end than if it stayed undeveloped. If we never did any of this, it would still stay at $1,000, for the whole time. So the whole concept around tax increment financing is, hey, developer, we really want you to develop this property. We're willing to reimburse you for some of your costs, such as cleanup costs, and we're willing to send you some of that new tax revenue that was generated to pay you back, because at the end of us paying you back, this property is going to generate a heck of a lot more in tax revenue for us than it would have been had it never been developed before.
But it's never really a reimbursement, it's just taxes they're not paying.
They are paying the taxes.
They pay it and then we write them a check back?
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So they pay it just like a normal tax bill, and then we pay them back. And it's not just, and this gets a little in the weeds, and I'll try to not go too far. It's not just city taxes that are captured and sent back to them. We can capture county taxes. So like the county general operating millage, we can capture that. So we can capture some non-city taxes to help pay back the developer, so that's less of an impact on us. And in some cases, we can capture some state money. Now, the developer has to apply for that. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, because the state has a lot of red tape. It can delay a project. But if we can also capture state money, in addition to city and county money, it pays it back that much faster, and it's less of our money that's being captured.
Who makes the decision on the county money? Is that our decision?
Yeah. So, and we're going to be coming to you. We have a, and this works with this works with the Downtown Development Authority as well. Works just like TIF. So when we do projects in our downtown development area, basically 28th Street between Clyde Park and I think Byron Center. Is it Byron Center?
So the DDA is between Division Avenue and Byron Center.
Yeah, okay. So it works the same way, is if we do a project in our DDA district, the DDA captures tax money from the county to help fund some of our DDA projects, which is really good for us, actually. We're capturing what I call OPM, other people's money, for this. So it's actually it's a good thing for us from a financial point of view. So I know this can be complicated, but the idea with all of those, when we talk about TIF, we talk about brownfield plans and how, hey, there's 100% TIF capture or 70% TIF capture. This is really kind of how it works. The developer and the city agree on what cost we will reimburse them for, and then they pay their normal tax bill, and then we agree to reimburse them with the new taxes that are generated, whether it's 100% of those taxes or 70% of those taxes. Obviously, a developer, for example, would love it if it's 100% because they get paid back more quickly. We look at it as, well, that's fine too, but if we do a 70% tax capture, it may take longer to repay the developer, but we get some of that tax money right away. And we may look at this depending on the type of project it is. So if you look at an industrial project where they want reimbursement of contamination, for example, maybe we'll do 100% tax capture, because usually the industrial properties don't demand a lot of city services. Whereas if we look at a housing project, that maybe we get calls for police or we get calls for fire or something like that, maybe we do a 70% tax capture so that we're generating the benefit of some of that new tax revenue, if you will.
What happens when the property changes hands?
That brownfield plan goes with it. So that's how it works. And again, the idea here is if we never did this and the property didn't redevelop, you'd still be collecting, in this example, $1,000 a year on a vacant or undeveloped piece of property. Whereas if we're willing to reimburse the developer with new tax revenue while still receiving old tax revenue, at the end, we're collecting a heck of a lot more in tax revenue for the city taxpayers than we would have had we not done this. Is that, any questions on how that works, or?
So I have a few questions just to get your thoughts on this. So what I'm hearing is the lower the tax capture rate, the more desirable for the city, right? Because even though it extends it out a longer period, we're going to capture more revenues early on and be able to use that money. Is there a way also, as I've been thinking through this, so let's just say somebody does do this, and then at the end of their term, whether it's 10, 15, 20 years out, is there a way we could have a clause in there that they can't apply for it again, that we can really, this property is only eligible for one time or one thing? Because what I don't want to do is, hey, we're doing, and again, I'm probably mixing a lot of things here, but just tax incentives.
And we're not required to do any of this.
Right.
So whether in your example where, hey, we'll do this once, but we don't want to do it again when the brownfield plan expires. So, and when we put the the TIF plan together, they have a consultant that will calculate these numbers and see how long it will take to repay. I think the most under state law, the longest brownfield plan or TIF plan you can have is 35 years, I think is the maximum. But the council has the discretion, in your example, that say after 10 years it's paid off and the developer wants to do further developments to the property and would look at another TIF plan, you're not obligated to do that.
It's also not likely that that would occur. So one thing to keep in mind is that the way the statute works, if you're looking for just, let's say it's an industrial property. So the reimbursement would be applied through a brownfield plan and a work plan, which would be approved by the Brownfield Authority, City Council, and then it goes to the state, and Eagle has to approve that. And what you're asking for is to essentially clean the site up to bring it back up to standard. So once you've done that, there's nothing else to ask for after that point. So really the program itself is intended as that one time to bring the property back up to level. Now, housing is potentially different because the housing statute isn't necessarily to remediate a site, but the same principles would apply. It's to bring forth a designated amount of affordable housing at a specific point in time. It's utilized just for that one sole time. There wouldn't be an opportunity to bring that back around. So these really are a one time and done type incentive.
I think to his point, though, I think to Rob's point is the longer you stretch it out, the more likely you are to encounter that. So like for an industrial user, if they use the building for 15 years, depending on what they're doing, they might contaminate it themselves. So is there any provision to lock you out of having to clean it up for them?
So hypothetical. This is really, we're going down hypothetical road. So let's say that happened. Let's say we had a really heavy industrial user come in that contaminated the site. They cleaned it up and then recontaminated it. I think Eagle would probably have some concerns because one of the things they look at is what the future land use is, but let's go with that hypothetical for a second. If then they were to come back around, there's also a statute that requires that if you have contaminated a site that you're responsible for the cleanup of that. So it would be hard to justify, I can't see Eagle or the Brownfield Authority
That's the
saying.
answer I'm looking
They
Yeah.
won't, because they'll consider them a PRP, a potentially responsible party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to get the benefit of getting assistance cleaning up something that was their fault. A lot of these contaminated properties, the company bought it from somewhere else where it was contaminated 60 years ago. So the property owner is not at fault for it. And we're trying to level the playing field to make, the idea is to make the cost of developing the brownfield about the same as the cost to develop a greenfield site. So that's why in this example, we'd be willing to reimburse for contamination costs, cleanup costs, because if they were going to redevelop a greenfield site, they wouldn't have cleanup costs to deal with. And in a built-out city like Wyoming, we do have a lot of parcels that may have contamination on it from previous industrial uses. And so this is a way for us to redevelop existing parcels versus having a company go somewhere else.
So even just an example of that, a great example of that is, it could be that a property owner buys a vacant parcel that looks fine on the ground. They don't think there's an issue there. And through their due diligence, they identified that there used to be a gas station on this site and that there are barrels underground. That's really one of the primary goals of this program is to then help that developer who there's no longer a responsible entity involved anymore. The gas station has been long gone, to help clean up that site, bring it back to its normal greenfield status, if you would, and then encourage that redevelopment. Otherwise, that parcel may sit vacant forever because the cost to bring it back to greenfield might prevent it from being redeveloped.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm applying this appropriately. So I think we referenced, we had a lot of discussion at one of our council meetings about 2 developments. Those were not brownfield though, right? Those are just TIF, not brownfield related,
So that's
correct?
not accurate and accurate at the same time.
Okay.
So John, do you mind if I hop around this
Yeah, because
presentation a little bit?
mine's frozen.
Okay. So real quick, so brownfield plans have existed since 1996, but in 2003, through Public Act 90, there was an allowance.
2023?
That's what I meant. Thank you. In 2023, there was an allowance to provide it for housing-specific activities. So it's still part of the overall brownfield program, but it's specific now for housing. So it doesn't have to meet that same remediation. It doesn't have to be.
It's not just for
let's just
contaminated
say.
properties anymore. Now we can use it for
I just wanna
housing
make sure I'm
programs.
Yes.
Tracking in this correctly.
Yep.
So
Okay.
the 2 housing programs that came, or the 2 housing projects that came in December were coming under the brownfield plan. So they still had to submit a brownfield plan to the Wyoming Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. It had to have a work plan. It has to be submitted for review by the state, but it isn't a contaminated site. So they're using that statute, but they've expanded it. So now they can come in and they can say, in order to provide affordable housing, we'd like to get reimbursement for certain types of activities. So when we look at the brownfield policy, on the left-hand side of your screen, you're going to see are the eligible expenses per the statute. So the state says, if you're providing housing and you're going to use this economic development tool, any one of these lists of items could be covered. When we looked at that and we worked with council and the Wyoming Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, we limited that to 3. So we said if you are building public infrastructure, if there are existing structures on the site that need to be demolished, or there are other site prep costs that you're going to incur, those are the only eligible activities. So those are the only things that a housing developer can come to the board and say, I would like reimbursement for those costs.
So if the developer says, hey, I want you to help reimburse us for renovation of existing structures, we would say, under this policy, we'd say, no, we're not going to do that. So, but if it's one of those 3 things, we're saying, okay, we'll agree to reimburse you for public infrastructure, demolition of any existing structures, or any site prep cost.
As long as the project also met certain other standards. So the policy itself also required that, actually, let's jump to this one. Also required that if it was a rental project, that the units were going to be leased at 90% of area median income or less. That 20% of those units would be rented below market rate, and that rent and income restrictions must be in place for a minimum of 10 years. So when we talk about 90%, the statute allows 120%. So on the screen in front of you, you see 120%, that's that top bar. And you'll see where it says for a one person household, that's $89,400. In Wyoming, that's essentially market rate. So what our policy says is we're not going to take the 120%, we're going to take 90%. So in our community, that would be for someone making $67,000, we'll just call it $67,000 a year. When the Brownfield board was evaluating that policy, one thing they were looking at was in our community, who makes $67,000 per year, and is that a reflective need that we see in our community? So we know based on Bureau of Labor Statistics data that the average kindergarten teacher wage for Grand Rapids, Wyoming, Kentwood is $61,000 a year. We know that for middle high school teachers, it's $60,000 a year. We know that nursing assistants in this area make $40,000 annually. So what we were looking at was trying to find a way to provide more affordable housing for the sector of the population that's doing amazing work and has these great jobs, but their income levels maybe don't allow them to be paying some of these higher wage rates. So the policy itself incentivizes specifically housing that's targeted towards families making within these different lower income brackets. Does that make sense?
It does, and it just raises a few more questions. I know in the discussion that we had, asking the developer, I think Sheldon had asked as far as what is below market rate, what's the definition, how do we make sure that we have clear understanding? So if a normal rent rate is $1,500 a month, do we have a certain number that they can only rent up to?
We do. So MSHDA actually, as part of the program, has published all of those standards. So they say exactly, not only do they tell us what the area median income levels have to be, they then have corresponding rental rates to go with all of that. So they're telling the developer, based on this area median income, you cannot charge more than X number of dollars.
That was rental, and I think Sheldon's question was actually driven towards the sale of a lot or a home. So it's sales versus rental.
So the same principle applies. So they have guidance on, again, the intent is always to make sure that people aren't spending more than 40% of their income on housing expenses. So the math is the same, whether it's rental or housing. There's still guidance from MSHDA which says at this price point, what someone should be making or not making. Does that make sense? Or have I confused the topic?
No, it sounds like it's pretty well defined, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already been dictated by MSHDA, so we just follow that.
That's correct.
That guidance on that, whether it's rental or purchase.
Correct. So the big takeaway from this is if you're doing an environmental, usually typically industrial brownfield plan, Eagle is the one that sets all of those rules. So the same way that they have standards for what applies, checklists and everything that we have to work through, MSHDA has created a very similar thing for the housing program. So these plans, after they get reviewed by the Wyoming Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and the reason I keep turning over here is we have a council member who serves on the Wyoming Redevelopment Brownfield Authority. So as we review those plans with them, we check all of the boxes to show that it's in compliance with MSHDA, and then we look at our policy to make sure it's also in line with the more restrictive policy that we have in the city, which is in addition to only those three, we have certain requirements around area median income. And then we also look at some other things. We want to make sure preference will be given to those located along commercial corridors with adjacent commercial activity. We do say in the policy that majority homeowner occupied is preferred and that it aligns with the Wyoming Reimagined Master Plan and the most recent housing needs study. And I want to draw your attention back up to the majority homeowner occupied, because that's where we have to look at that whole picture, right? For the Wilson project specifically, obviously that was a rental project, not a homeowner occupied project. But when you go back and you look at that 90% of area median income, the $67,000, what we were looking at was how many opportunities are there for housing in and around that area for people making $67,000 or less a year. And there simply aren't very many options. So this project was elevated in the list because it's meeting a housing need that's been demonstrated in our housing needs assessment, serving a population that doesn't have housing choice within that area. Does that make sense? Okay.
And I guess my final piece is just to have discussion as well is, as we look at the city, and my struggle is that area, those were two properties that were greenfield, hadn't been, well, one had an existing house on it, still very desirable for development. So by putting a TIF in, then it delays our collection of full tax base for 10, 15, whatever that duration is. And so I guess running the math and the numbers, and I applaud you for, minimizing the to now 3 requirements of what we can get to even qualify for this. But at some point, at some time, I don't want to have this, open up so we get TIFs for any development anywhere, even in some very highly desirable properties that will be developed probably regardless for the right developer. I just want to be careful that we're not waylaying our ability to collect taxes and for what's our purpose and our why. And I hear you as far as housing, I think that's great. But as we look at our bottom line, our budget and where we're at, I just want to make sure that we're not delaying any more collection of revenues.
And I completely understand where you're coming from on that, and I'll let John jump in here, but I do just want to say that is one reason that the brownfield policy does require the 70%. So on the screen in front of you is what John walked you through, and the whole point of the 70% for housing specifically was as we're bringing residents on board, the city would be increasing its capture. So if you want to...
Yeah, and the other thing is, this is designed, for a public policy question of, do we want to encourage more affordable housing here in the city when there's such a housing shortage? If a developer comes in and wants to build $800,000 homes, it's not eligible for this. So in answer to your question, we would not be using any of our tax revenue to repay a developer that wants to build $800,000 homes. It's designed to provide housing for people that meet those 90% area median income limitations.
So I guess the issue that I kind of had, and there was a slide that had the specifics of those 2 projects. If we could go to that, would be great. Because I felt like it didn't, okay, here we go. I guess my main thing is I really want to actually make an impact on affordable housing. And I feel like a lot of projects that are labeled affordable housing don't actually seem that, like the word affordable is starting to lose its meaning, because the actual gap between how much things cost and what people can afford is much bigger than what the word affordable housing tends to sometimes mean. And so I kind of, the fact that, like, for instance, Wilson, the whole project as a whole has 56 units, and then 11 of them, only like a small portion, is going to be available to people who make close to the median income. So to me, it just didn't feel like a significant enough chip away at the affordability issue, if that makes sense.
So I guess I would have 2 follow-up questions for you on that. The first is the policy itself actually dictates 20%. So this met the policy. It only requires that 20% of the units be affordable. So I guess my true question to that would be, would you like to see an increase in that number? And where I would caution is, keep in mind that there's also a balancing act happening here, right? We're trying to come forward with enough of an incentive to bring forward some affordable housing, while also keeping in mind that construction costs are elevating. So, if they can't sell a product for higher or rent a product for higher, then the ability to build the project might not come forward. So we're trying to walk that middle ground of how are we actually chipping away at providing affordable housing while keeping in mind that the project still has to remain viable.
Yeah, so with this, so does the dollar amount that they're allowed to ask for reimbursement on apply to the entire project, even though the affordability aspect is only a sliver of the project?
Okay, I see where you're going here. No, it doesn't. So
Okay.
would a policy that, then, would you be in favor of looking at something that says if you're going to provide 20%, then you can maybe apply for up to this amount, or you get more if you're going 70%, for example?
Yeah, I guess that's my main thing. I don't want us to just be giving out, I don't know, we're not giving out money that we already had. We're giving out money that wouldn't exist if the project wasn't being done. I get that. But I want it to actually be in the spirit of the policy, which the policy only exists for the sake of affordable housing. So
So Marissa, if I understand you, and correct me if I'm wrong, if 20% of the units were set aside for affordable housing units, are you saying then that we could reimburse 20% of the site preparation cost? And if they provided 70% of the units as affordable housing, we would reimburse 70% of the site preparation costs, as an example?
sure, potentially something like that. Only reimburse them for the things that are actually going to be affordable housing.
Okay.
Because otherwise, this policy didn't exist for housing until it existed for affordable housing specifically, right? So there is no equivalent TIF for non-affordable housing.
Yeah, so that's, and yeah, so that gets back to, yes, so we wanted to provide information on this, hopefully didn't muddy the waters too much, hopefully clarified it a little bit. And, you know, obviously the council approved one housing TIF, not the other, but at the end of the day, we also need some input from council in terms of, you know, our current housing TIF policy. Do you like it? Do you not like it? You know, there's some feedback there we can take a look at from Marissa. I don't know if there's any other feedback you'd want us to look at.
We do have 2 other developers that have reached out and asked about applying for a housing TIF, housing brownfield plan. So staff is looking to provide them some direction, or at least a timeline for what next steps might look like.
What helps you decide how many years is going to work?
So I look at we look at their performance. They put together this massive table that we look at to understand. Typically, if you're going to go, usually 10 years is the minimum that you can actually get it done in. Sometimes you can do a little bit less.
It's really, the length of time to pay back is really based on the amount of cost you're willing to reimburse and how much tax revenue is generated, new tax revenue is generated on the site.
But can the years be capped?
Well, by state law, they're capped at 35 years.
But can you cap it shorter than that, even if you don't repay the whole amount in that time?
You can, but that overall, in my personal opinion, that would hurt the overall program, because if you're going to cap it at that, you might as well just cap a dollar amount then or something, because most of the time, especially if you want the 70% as opposed to 100%, it is just naturally going to take longer, as you saw in the example that John walked through. A 10-year can get accomplished, $100,000 can get accomplished within a 10-year in the hypothetical, but if you do that 70% capture, it elongates the time period. So it's a trade-off, right? It takes longer, but you have more money coming in each year as revenue. So it's a question of, I guess it's a policy question then, in terms of, would you prefer a shortened time period, or would you prefer some revenue capture in between?
Yeah, I don't know. Any other questions?
Maybe a couple comments. So I guess I would be more in favor of this if it was a for sale product versus a rental product. I guess the way I'm seeing it, let's just say we had in this first scenario here, we had a rental product, and after 10 years, they paid back all of that. We reimbursed all of that tax. Then at year 10, that could no longer, if the developer wanted to, he could raise those market rates right back up to where they were. So what we would be doing is just helping him pay for his property for 10 years with lower market rents. And at the end of that, we basically just finance part of his product where he's going to be able to collect his 100% rent with no low income attachment to it. Am I seeing that right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so under the policy, once it's fully paid back, then they can set the rent out. It's we have it as a minimum 10 years or the length
Yep.
of the payback,
Yep.
whichever's greater.
So that's why I would like to see it more in a for sale product than in a rental product. I feel like we're picking winners and losers. All of these are going to show up before council, correct?
Yes.
So we're picking winners and losers. I feel like we could be putting the city in maybe in a place we don't want to be by setting a precedent, and maybe this is more a question for Greg, I don't know. But what are we doing when, like, in December, we picked one over the other? Is that a precedent that we've set now? Is that something that we could be in line for a lawsuit if we don't allow someone to get a TIF and we did allow somebody else? What does that do to us when we make decisions?
No, I think it's discretionary with council, and you can see a project that looks fantastic, and you might say, oh, council agreed, let's do it. This property's been blighted for many years, that's the whole purpose, so that you could rehab things that are just not getting active again. So you can look at them on a case-by-case basis, as long as you're not making decisions based on the things we all know we can't do, civil rights, those kind of things, we're fine. It's discretionary, then it's purely financial.
Greg, would you, go ahead, John.
I was going to say that is one reason we wanted to have a policy to sort of provide some consistency and predictability both with council and with the developers, so that when they do approach us, we could give them a policy that says, look, if you comply with this policy, you would get this, and if you don't, you won't. And it provides some certainty or predictability that really both sides would want.
Right. And then the other thing is just a geographical thing. I think it's just, there are certain areas of our city where I think this works better than others. And I understand that probably can't be written in, but that comes back to us picking winners and losers again, I think. I think this works better, on the north end of town than it does on the south end of town. But, I know we can't just write that into it, so that's where I get concerned about picking winners and losers a little bit, because the area on the south side of town, like Rob was saying, is very desirable as compared to maybe some areas on the north side of town, and the property values reflect that. So just concerns. I'm just trying to figure this out in my mind. What's the right way? What's the wrong way? And I know we have to write up some sort of policy, but those are my thoughts.
As like a secondary question on Sheldon's first point about the fact that they can just make the rent whatever they want when the reimbursement period's over, are we allowed to write anything in our policy that makes it a longer period, or is that illegal?
I guess we can check, but I mean, right now we had it as 10 years or the length of payback, whichever is greater. We can look into this, but you could make it 20 years or the payback, whichever is greater, so you'd have a minimum of 20 at least.
I think that would be preferable. I mean, if we're allowed to do that, because otherwise, I don't know, the other thing that could help extend that is to just do 50%, because then the calendar gets stretched out longer to begin with. So I don't know if that would be better or worse, but something to think about.
And again, it's a balancing act, because if I don't know what the tipping point is, but if you make it 50% capture, or you've got to provide, rents for 800 years, so forth, they may say, nope, we can't make this project work, and then you don't get any affordable housing at that point. So it's sort of that balancing act of trying to find that sweet spot. The city is not required to do this, so this is not a requirement that we have to do this. It's just a new law that they added to this law back in 2023, and obviously there's been a lot of interest expressed that's come before you, and we've got some other developers in the pipeline that are looking at this as well. So we really wanted to get some one, make sure you understood how TIF works, and then two, some feedback so that whatever policy we have reflects the will of the council, and it's something that we can then communicate with the developers.
And is there maybe another, again, because again, if I'm thinking about what Nicole just said as far as the objective is with construction costs rising, to try to generate a pathway for them to develop this and not be financially impaired for that, we'll call it that short window while they're doing it. Is there a way, instead of maybe TIF, that we could just do, hey, 2-year tax abatement to allow them to ramp in and develop, and just freeze that blue line tax area, hold it there, and then it then rolls into full taxation after year 3 or something, just throwing out different ideas in order to facilitate allowances for them to, make that construction process maybe less of an impairment for them. Just throwing out different ideas, if it's possible, feasible to do that as well.
I'm not aware that the law
Okay.
will allow you to do that. And if I understood you, you're saying, hey, we would abate their taxes, they don't have to pay anything for 3 years, and then after that, they pay full bore.
Right. This is just me kind of thinking my way through this without running numbers, but I
Yeah.
mean, at least concept. Because if you are foregoing hundreds of $1,000s worth of taxes, yeah, we might want to, moderate that. But, at least having that in the tool chest for us
I mean,
to think about.
you'd have to do something like 100% tax capture for 3 years, and then that's
Yeah.
it, but that would only generate so much for them. The other thing, and this is getting into the weeds, TIF doesn't capture every single tax. So the developer would still be paying, there's certain like debt taxes, like a school may have a millage to repay a bond issue. Those can't be captured, those still get collected for the purpose of paying it off, so.
Any other ideas?
How much TIF did we approve for Salmon Estates? And I was thinking too, with our 36th Street site, how much did we do for that too?
So for Salmon View, it was 1.7 million. And I would have to go back and look at what the number is for Site 36.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, because now that I understand it more, I'd like to know, what did we approve?
Can you go back to that slide? And what was being paid for at Wilson that added up to 6.5 million?
Wilson had infrastructure costs and demolition costs.
So like the streets?
Streets, water, sewer.
Well, I heard a couple issues, and I guess we need to see if there's any consensus around changing the policy. Ownership was one, location, and duration. Did I miss any others that people wanted to look at?
My biggest thing is just, I don't want it to be a regular project that's mostly market rate where the developer goes, oh, you know what, if I throw a couple affordable, quote unquote, affordable units in there, I can apply for this. I want it to actually go towards projects where the point of the project is, hey, I want to do affordable housing, but I can't, so can you help me? You know what I mean? As opposed to like making it be like sort of almost like a loophole that a market rate developer can sort of slide their way into if they throw a couple units in there that are affordable.
Yeah, I don't know. Nicole, can you speak to like income disparity in projects? Is it better to have a broader disparity, or?
It's better to have a mix in general. So, and there's a lot of research that talks about what is the appropriate mix. Is it a third? Is it a half? What's that breaking point or that break-even point where you see the benefits go both ways? I would probably advocate that meeting at least a minimum 50% or like 40% threshold would achieve the goal while still providing enough of the capital resources to make the project viable. Because if while the brownfield is a powerful tool, in order to provide for a 100% affordable project or something like that, we're more likely to see a developer go down the pilot route, the low-income housing tax credit route. So if you're trying to find that middle ground of you don't want to go the pilot route, you want to stay within the brownfield statute, then, not being a developer, I would probably say under 50% would still give that flexibility of being able to raise enough capital to make the project realistic while meeting more of those affordability goals.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would be open to either making the percentage higher or just making it so that the amount that they can seek reimbursement for only applies to how much of the project was deemed affordable.
I'm not sure. How would you do that?
So like if they, for the example, like if they're only going to make 10% of these units affordable, then they can only get 10% of whatever construction costs or whatever it is that they're getting reimbursed for, as opposed to
10% of the site cost, 10% of the demolition of existing structure cost, that type of thing.
So that might be one way. Sliding scale comes to mind, where we do that with our tax abatements, where we could look at, is there a way where, depending on the amount, there's a scale that kind of allows for different values? Maybe it's not as easy as saying it's a 10% for 10%, but there's some type of scale that would reward you on the high end and incentivize you to work in that direction.
Yeah, something like that. I just don't want to reward regular projects that are barely affordable under the guise of affordability. That's my main thing.
Anybody else have feedback on that issue? What about the duration or ownership? Anybody want to weigh in on? I kind of like the idea of favoring ownership more, and I know that's in there, but I think it makes a lot of sense to try and drive ownership out of it more than anything, because that lasts for the people that.
Well, the question is it just ownership? Because right now it's a preference. It's not not the only thing. So that would be the feedback. Is it absolutely required, or is it just a preferable thing?
I prefer ownership. You take more responsibility.
And that's how it's written now.
Yeah.
It's a prefer. It's not absolutely required.
I would want to look at the length of time that, the ones that are going to be for rent, the amount of time that they are locked in to keep that affordable rental rate. Because yeah, if it's only going to be a 10-year thing and then all of a sudden they're going to be like, psych, it's going to be $1,500, then that does defeat the purpose.
I agree with that.
Yep, I would agree.
So if I may summarize, I think what I'm hearing is if we keep the preference for homeowner occupied, but we add some clarifying language that if it is a rental, it should be for an extended period of time, and work to figure out what might be appropriate on that.
Yeah, I think that's what we're hearing. What about geography? Can we favor different geography?
I want to defer to Greg on this, but what I will say is we have a housing needs assessment, which assesses the need for housing across the entire geography of Wyoming. So there is a need across the entire city for affordable housing at different price points. I'll defer to our city attorney on the.
And from a policy standpoint, you probably want to be more flexible. If you limit it to just the one area, if you don't have things that need to be rehabilitated in that area, you just defeated your purpose. So I think I would think about being a little bit more flexible and stick with maybe a broader plan, like Nicole, like it's already in the plan.
Can we make it a preference like we do with the ownership?
If you can.
I feel like we already kind of have some wording in there about like proximity to, I don't remember what slide it was, but there was already some stuff that kind of got at that.
The one thing that I would point out is if you are going to try to dictate geography, and you're also going to put in the policy that the preference is for homeowner occupied, remember these are 2-scale projects, they're not one-off parcels, so you should also think about where there is opportunity to build housing for homeowner occupied at scale, and that's not really on the north side of the community.
They are
So
just preferences.
They are just preferences, but maybe they're starting to conflict a little bit if we make it too strong of language.
Welcome to my mind.
Okay. Just a quick, can we revisit those two that we talked about? So the Wilson project, and again, the thing that just really all of a sudden struck me as I did the comparison is the one which provided far more housing was a 1.7, and the other one that had a limited number of housing units was 6.5 million.
Yeah, that struck me too.
That
So-
was, it just seems like a big disparity, as well as, what's the length of those two as far as the TIF financing terms?
So I can pull up the terms for you. The big thing to remember here is that because the Salmon View property is selling property and more of it, they have more profit to help subsidize that cost as well. And so they specifically came in for a lower ask to be more in line with the affordable component. And they had that availability because they're selling more of their product at a higher price point.
I think maybe when we bring back a draft of the TIF policy, we can bring back just the details from those two brownfield TIF plans, so we can see exactly what it was.
Yeah, I just struggle with the numbers and the comparison of the two and the impact that will have, and what we're giving up for the big difference in
We'll
impact.
provide that information when we bring back a revised TIF policy for you guys to take a look at.
Do you have something?
Oh, I was going to say, can we go back to that slide where it had the numbers?
Which slide specifically?
Salmon and Wilson?
Here you go.
Any questions? Have what you
But
need?
we didn't approve the TIF for the Wilson.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. So this is just an example, if we would have, this is what it would look like?
So these are just the two requests that council saw in December. So these are just summaries of the two requests. The Salmon View was approved by council, the Wilson was not.
Right. And how many years did we don't remember. How many years, what was the TIF percentage for salmon?
So it would have been we can pull that information and provide that.
Okay,
Yeah, we're going to provide that information, Renee, when we
Okay.
bring back the reworked TIF policy for you to take a look at.
okay. And I'd also want to look at like Site 36 too, and let's revisit that too, because I want to see that. Because I know we approved it, I think, for that too. Didn't
So
we?
yes, Site 36 has an approved brownfield plan, and then several approved work plans for all of the different components
Yeah,
that are on that
That
site.
wasn't
That's-
housing.
No, but that is also a TIF, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so if you can bring that back to, just to refresh my memory, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Any other feedback? Okay. Next item, any other matters, John?
Just Public Works will be out tomorrow plowing the cul-de-sacs and local roads. We finally got a little bit of weather that got warmer, so that hard pack that you see is starting to fluff up. So we can't plow that when it's still hard because the plowing is very inefficient. It doesn't really pick it up. But now that we're getting warmer weather and tomorrow's supposed to be even warmer than it was today, we're going to go plow that fluff stuff. We put word out on social media on that as well, just to let the public know.
So they can move their cars.
Yep, so part of that is to make sure you comply with the odd even parking as well. That's been a continuous challenge. Leave it at that. That's it.
Go ahead.
Is there a way for the residents to communicate with us, especially during off hours? Because I know a lot of posts, whether it be Quiet Neighbors, whether it be Nextdoor, whether it be Facebook. Again, it's not just Wyoming, it's throughout. And I know it's been a brutal winter. But the comment specific about Wyoming was, hey, I've got, my mailman was, my mail carrier was stuck in my street. They couldn't, deliver mail, and I've been trying to get a hold. Well, it's Friday morning, and there's nobody that will answer. How do I get somebody to realize that? And I hear you about snow being, packed down, but there were a number, and I can even attest to my street, one side, it was packed down, and then the other has snow like this deep that was very fluffy, that hadn't been, hit for quite some time. And it's becoming more, people are becoming more vocal about it. And then the other piece out there was about the sidewalk plowing and the, we'll call it inconsistency of when they will be showing up and what they're doing. And I guess I just want to make sure that we have good ways to respond to that, because it's becoming more outspoken on those two pieces to me, as I've been hearing different things, and it's coming back saying, hey, we don't listen, the council's not responsive, so there's just things I want to be sensitive that we're working together on that piece.
So we do have I don't know what the correct phrase is, but they can go on a website and fill out a web form. Feedback form, and we do monitor our communications, does monitor that all the time.
Okay.
And obviously if it's an emergency, we deal with it. If it's something that's routine, then we'll deal with it on the next business day. Sidewalk plowing, they'll go out when we get 2 inches or more and plow. And this is something where they may be contacting the contractor that does plow the sidewalks, because those are starting to fluff. And you say this whole fluff up thing, but when it's really hard packed, they can run over and they're not going to make any hill of beans of difference with it. But now that it's fluffing up, we'll see if they can come out and take care of some of that as well. Because I saw some of the local streets starting to get that way. I spent this weekend getting that off my driveway, and because I couldn't get it before, it was too hard packed, and I'm seeing a lot of it. Well, this is really the residents' responsibility in their driveway that they've just left, but that's their responsibility. So, but yeah, they can communicate with that web form, and we do monitor that all the time.
Okay.
And I know the sidewalk plowing used to be 2 inches by 11 o'clock at night. If there was 1.5 inches by 11 o'clock at night, the sidewalk plows were not out. So that's that, and I'm sure that rule has probably stayed the same with 30 plus years. So that'll help with the sidewalk. But it's a mess, because the street plows throw it on the sidewalk, the sidewalk throws it on the streets, and then it's just a big mess. Who came in last to win? But yeah, it's a mess. And I don't think there's a good solution.
It's been a difficult year that way.
It has been.
Yeah.
Yep, and we all just have to.
Yep.
There is also a 24-hour emergency line that PW has, so if there was an instance, you can always call into that as well.
Okay. Is that something that we can post that out there as well? Just ways to contact us in the event that we're not open? Because I don't want to push for, hey, we need to be open on Fridays or what have you. I think if we have other channels to do it and it's monitored, that's a good way to do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
What else? Okay. Acknowledgement of visitors. If anybody would like to speak to council that's in the audience, now's your chance. Give you 3 minutes. Seeing nobody, we do need to ask for a motion to go into a closed session for pending litigation. Can I get a motion, please? Motion by Kyle, support by Renee. Call the roll.
Councilmember Brethauer,
Yes.
Hill,
Yes.
Arnoyes,
Yes.
DeKreiger,
Yes.
Hostler,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes.
We'll be in the West County.
Yeah, motion passes. We'll take 5 minutes and meet in the West Conference Room.